COVID-19 is ravaging our world in many ways we never imagined. State-owned investment vehicles, sovereign wealth funds, have not been spared. Now, a report chronicling the impact of the pandemic on these funds by Konfidants Advisory projects some losses of value in these funds globally and in Africa. Now, can we quantify these losses, and what's the way forward for countries such as Ghana, which rely on these funds? Joining me via Zoom is Michael Cotto, his managing partner at Konfidants Advisory. Great to have you on the show this afternoon. Before we delve into the impact of COVID-19 on sovereign wealth funds, just for the benefit of our audience, what are sovereign wealth funds?
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to join you on the show. Sovereign wealth funds are simply state-owned investment vehicles that countries set up for the purposes of, either setting aside some of the country's wealth for purposes that the countries have determined to be strategic to their national development. So there are various types of sovereign wealth funds. The most common ones are sovereign wealth funds that are set up based on some natural resources. So you could have hydrocarbon. Majority of sovereign wealth funds are based on oil and petroleum resources. And countries will set up some of the funds for future generations, or they may set up some of the funds as a rainy day fund so that in crisis periods, they could draw on the funds to stabilize their economies.
So how are those funds being impacted by COVID-19 around the world and in Africa, really?
Well, the impact is very varied. The way COVID has disrupted the global economy in very diverse ways. And one of the key impacts of COVID has been the impact on commodity markets. So crude oil markets have falling so dramatically. We saw just about a month ago oil prices in the U.S. falling into the negative. We've never seen that before. Brent crude prices are still below $20 a barrel, and that's been a huge impact because most countries are in shutdowns. There's a lot of travel bans. Flights have been halted, and a lot of vehicles are not moving. So there's no demand for fuel, and therefore you have a huge excess of supply of fuel that has not been taken up in the market. So oil prices are falling as a result of that. And because a lot of sovereign wealth funds, majority of sovereign wealth funds in the world are based on petroleum wealth, that has impacted the funds because typically every year when countries make a lot of money and make a lot of earnings from petroleum and hydrocarbon sales, they allocate some of those resources to these funds. So the funds are not going to be getting the resources that they would have in ordinary times earned from the sale of petroleum resources. That's the first impact. The second impact is that because a lot of these funds are designed to help stabilize economies when they're in crisis, a lot of governments around the world are drawing down resources from these funds in order to help stabilize their economies. So that's the second impact. So a lot of withdrawals from the funds. And the third one is that we've seen a lot of volatility in global stock exchanges. A lot of the sovereign wealth funds have invested in equities and all kinds of financial securities that have exposures to stock market volatilities. So that's the third impact, which is that a lot of the stock market volatilities are crushing the assets of a lot of these sovereign wealth funds. So we've seen three main impacts, and at Konfidants, we've turned these three impacts as the triple drain on the assets of stock markets. They're losing money from the oil wealth that they get annually.
Right.
They're suffering, the investments are suffering from declines due to stock market volatilities. And governments are drawing down from these funds in order to stabilize their budgets and their economies.
And Michael, let's come home to Ghana, because the Stabilization Fund has seen some withdrawals to fight COVID-19. And there has been a debate whether to withdraw from the Ghana Heritage Fund. Hope you followed that debate. What do you think will be the shape of these two funds by the time COVID-19 is over, if ever it will be?
Yes, so yes, you're right. So Ghana has withdrawn about 48% of the value of the Stabilization Fund. This is what the Stabilization Fund is designed to do. When the economy is in crisis, it's supposed to help stabilize, the the fiscal situation. So it's a stabilization fund, so it's doing its work, and that's fine. The Ghana Heritage Fund is designed for a different purpose. It's essentially to help save wealth from Ghana's petroleum resources for future generations. And if you remember, in the very early days of the COVID crisis, when we had to go into early shutdown, the impact on government finances was very dire. And at the time, government was exploring all manner of options. And obviously, the Heritage Fund became an option to consider. I remember all the debates we had about whether to touch it or not. I think government has decided to put that on hold for now. One of the reasons why the Heritage Fund has not been touched is partly because the request that government made to the IMF and the World Bank has yielded some positive response. The $1 billion support facility from the IMF, I've seen the World Bank has frozen debt repayment by Ghana for some period. And we're still negotiating for some sort of bilateral and multilateral support from other kinds of donors and lenders. So I think all of these have helped provide the government with some fiscal space. And so I think that looking forward, I don't expect that government will make any withdrawals from the Heritage Fund. I think that it will be preserved. The Stabilization Fund, I think, it will depend. Everything depends on when the pandemic will be over. If the pandemic will be over soon enough, it's obvious that economies will begin to rebound. Oil prices will begin to go up back to pre-crisis levels. And we can have a recovery in most sectors of the economy. Government will begin to get its revenues and taxes. We'll begin to do shipping and exports of our commodities again, and government revenue will rebound. Right. If all of these things happen quickly enough, I don't expect further withdrawals to be made from the Stabilization Fund. However, if the pandemic prolongs for a very long time, if we don't get a vaccine coming in soon enough, if we're having multiple infection waves, and the disruptions to global supply chains and exports and trade cannot happen, withdrawals from the Stabilization Fund.
Right, Michael. And it's important you point out that it all depends on when the COVID-19 pandemic is over, because I was going to ask you about recovery and whether there's recovery inside. But quickly, what are the lessons for preserving sovereign wealth funds, even in these times of crisis? And what should governments be doing differently around the world, here in Africa and Ghana? If you could do that in a minute.
So, I mean, I think that by the time COVID is over, there'll be a lot of discussions around how to structure sovereign wealth funds to be able to help countries deal with crises of this nature. I expect that it's possible that after COVID, there might be different kinds of sovereign investment vehicles that are designed for disaster insurance. So we have stabilization funds, typically for macroeconomic stabilization. I think that there might be a room for different kind of sovereign wealth vehicles that are designed around disaster insurance, and countries will be able to draw on those in special circumstances like this. COVID is a very particularly different kind of crisis, and sovereign wealth funds are not traditionally designed to deal with this kind of crisis. So I think the other lesson, and we're seeing some of the world's most powerful sovereign wealth funds doing strategic investments. A lot of the Gulf funds, Qatar, Saudi Arabia have been on a shopping spree. They're losing a lot of money. Globally, in the first quarter of 2020, sovereign wealth funds around the world lost about $1 trillion, mostly just due to stock market volatilities. Around the world, global stock markets hold about $8 trillion in assets combined. First quarter of 2020 alone, because of COVID, combined losses amounted to about $1 trillion. So a lot of the most powerful sovereign wealth funds around the world are rebalancing their portfolios. And what they're doing is, on a shopping spree, they're losing money, but they're also shopping for cheap assets, so that by the time COVID is over, they would have rebalanced their portfolios.
Okay. Thank you so much, Michael Koto. He is Managing Partner at Konfidants Advisory. Thanks for your perspective this afternoon.